Greetings once again. This is your host for the Tap In Podcast, Will Ross, and today we have an amazing episode for you. Our guest is Julius Horsthuis, the fractal artist who is responsible for making some of the most immersive and beautiful fractal art on the planet. Currently, Julius presides in the capital of the Netherlands, Amsterdam. Julius goes around the world at various festivals including Lollapalooza, Coachella, and recently the Visionarium Art Festival to display his mandel bulb technology art into enormous domes through projection technology so that everybody can sit and enjoy the visions that Julius is creating. Within this episode, Julius and I talk about the concept of fractals being alive and the more specific reality of fractals being found in any observable situation. With all this exciting information being handed away for free, it is my pure privilege and honor to host this podcast for y'all, and it's my hope that anything talked about in this episode can be used specifically for the betterment of all beings on the planet. If you have any questions or feel like you have something to say about the episode, don't forget to comment or like the page. The Tap In Podcast is a labor of love, and any support you give directly contributes to the next episode. So thank you so much for taking time to take interest. And beyond all of that, thank you so much for listening. Okay, let's tap in, open up, and art on as we hand it on over to this amazing conversation. Tap in, tap in, tap in, tap in. Hello, Julius.
Hi.
Welcome to the Tap In Podcast.
Glad to be here.
You're traveling from quite a long ways away from Amsterdam, Holland, isn't that right?
Amsterdam, yes. I flew all the way from Amsterdam to be on your podcast.
Oh, wow. I'm honored. Wow, it's also South by Southwest, so please.
That too.
You're very sweet, but I must be modest in this situation. Well, I guess, we've been talking for a little bit, trying to warm up, trying to, decipher what exactly we're going to talk about, and I guess that's a good place to jump in, and I just want to briefly kind of describe your art for the listeners, and it's kind of...
Please do.
It's kind of like... It's like a dreamscape, and I want to ask you later what your dreams are like, because it's kind of like there's a communication going on through fractal imagery where the ratio of nature is being translated into some weird geometric universe that's actually self-perpetuating in a sense, and it feels alive. And a lot of the things I wanted to ask you today are in a sense do you think that fractals are alive?
Wow, that's I've never heard that question before, but it's very interesting. There's definitely fractals in life all around us.
Uh-huh.
That's definitely true, right?
Mm-hmm.
If fractals are alive, well, I would have to think about that. That's really, they look alive. For me, they feel for me, they're definitely alive. When I explore, let's say, the fractal design space, then it's definitely feeling like you're sort of interacting with them, and because they're so unpredictable, they really feel alive.
Yes, the sensation of becoming is so familiar when looking at your art, and that idea is not unlike like a person's ego death within like a reincarnation structure, or like in a psychedelic experience. And this is what's really interesting, is because people have outlined the psychedelic experience as being a sort of death and renewal of the self, right? And so in a sense, a fractal that's just like constantly blooming and transforming is not unlike a person who goes through changes throughout life.
Yeah.
And that's what gives it that living characteristic, right?
Yeah, I can definitely see that that's where you're coming from there. There's one person actually who wrote me an email, and he went through like a bad moment in his life, and he tried to kill himself.
Oh, wow.
Obviously that was unsuccessful. I don't know exactly what he took, some overdoses of something.
That's a good thing to fail at.
Yes, he was happy that he failed at it, by the way, because he was doing very well at the moment when he wrote this. But
Good.
The thing that he saw as he was almost dead, this was like an NDA, right, for him. He saw one of my Fractal films, and he said like that was exactly the thing that I felt, and he took the trouble to write me that. So there's definitely something there that's like so familiar with these fractals and his experience there.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, so psychedelic literally translates to mind manifesting, right?
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yes, and so there's a large stigma within the psychedelic community that to experience those realms of beauty, that you'd have to ingest a drug or a chemical. And what's so wonderful about the level of art that you're making is it kind of bypasses that, and it puts it into whatever mindset you could be in at any sober point, and that transforms the perception of the person looking at it. Like when we look at your art, it's like, what is going on? Like so much, and this is what we were saying, is so much of the art is reflected into our interpersonal lives. Drama happens, and when a fractal is like, especially in like the inverted geometry transformations, it's a dramatic happening. Some of the music that was placed along with it, it's like very dramatic, and it looks like a being of sorts is like becoming alive and like moving through a landscape or something.
It's weird because all it does is just reflecting the landscape around it, but it doesn't reflect like a mirror, but it reflects with this sort of inverse geometry. It's like a mathematical equation, but it's really simple. Like if you would just draw it, you would go like, oh, that's not very interesting. But then if you sort of do that in 3D, in 3 dimensions, and you move that the boundary layer of that inverse geometry, you suddenly get a being, or you get some sort of, or the feeling that you're communicating with another dimension, or that's really exciting stuff. Yeah,
exactly. This kind of this is a strange idea that we've talked about on the podcast before, but it's like that ideas are alive, and that they have maybe in the future there'll be a way of like classifying ideas in a sense that there might be like a phylum to a certain idea or something like that. And it's like some of the most psychedelic people that I've listened to say that when they encounter beings in the other realm of consciousness, that it's like the only language they speak is beauty, and it's just saying like, beauty is real. And I really feel that when I look at your stuff, dude. So let me ask you, how long have you been working in this field?
Well, to answer that question, I have been doing fractals for 5 years, but I've been I think, like preparing for fractals for longer than that. I started working in film industry. I was like doing physical camera work and lighting work and sound work. Then from there I went to computer graphics, and I worked for a while doing first like stuff like logo design, animations, and that sort of stuff, and then later visual effects. So again, working with film, but this time with more virtual equipment, but still the same language as film, and that is actually, I think, really important as well. It's definitely something that is important for me when I work with Fractals too. Is the language of film and cinematography.
Yeah.
So I've been doing that for about 10 years, and then I discovered a little piece of software called Mandelbrot 3D. That at first I was just like testing it out, like, oh, it's interesting. As you do when you work in computer graphics, there's little pieces of software that but this one was so like fascinating, and I was immediately like, wow, I can do all these things and you don't have to model anything. With other 3D software, you have to create all the spaces, which is like other artists. So, they have to design everything, and then they have to model or texture or all these things. With Fractals, you don't need to do any of that. It just exists. It's like you're exploring these like existing. Obviously, there's an infinite number of them, and you have to sort of find the right one. But it's really like that sort of exploration of this, and then you have to set the camera right and do and get the right light. But that is that's been sort of my path towards being a fractal artist.
And I love the language you're using, the path. Because, I mean, when you go deep enough into these landscapes, it's real transcendental, man. Like, it's hard to identify as. I mean, what I mean by that is like it seems like you really leave this concept of like a human, and you become this creator that is like, in a sense, creating universes for people to be in consciously. With VR especially, and you've worked with people like Android Jones at Burning Man to create like these immersive, what would you call them, like projection experiences?
Yeah, if you're talking about the dome experiences, there is one big difference I think between domes and VR, and they're both very interesting, and they're both immersive.
Okay, what's the difference?
Well, it's very obvious that like the dome experience, you can experience it together. Like it's you experience it with your friends or with a crowd, and that feels. And VR is still a very lonely experience.
Very interesting.
That's just one thing that I. So I really like domes. I love the what Android did with the Samskara and the domes is because of that.
I think he's coming to town soon.
Is he?
Yeah, they're doing like a big event in like April, I believe.
Oh, okay, nice.
But regardless to the festivities of the future, the festivals that you've worked with in the past, what context are you typically sharing your art in? Like, is it during live performance, or is it in a dome, or?
I'm still looking for that. I'm not sure if there's ever going to be like, oh yeah, this is definitely it. Like, of course, I discovered these fractals for myself. Obviously, didn't discover fractals, and I'm looking for ways that can be anything. I started with releasing them online for people just to watch or download, or for VR, and I was then looking into like, it would be cool to have a more communal experience. So then definitely festivals and live VJing, or I'm trying to avoid the term VJing. I would call it like live visuals or something like that. Is a way I've really enjoyed at some festivals that really worked well, where people were just afterwards they would come up to me and go like, yeah, these visuals were so cool for the whole atmosphere of the evening and
oh yeah, dude, absolutely. Like the first time I actually found it's a bit of a contrast to what we're talking about, because a lot of the festivals, I mean, like the festival we talked about was Burning Man, which is innately like a psychedelic, community-based burn festival.
Yes.
But the way I found out about you and your art was through Meshuggah, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I mean, I love electronic dance music, but I love Meshuggah, and I love Tool, and I think that they're seated in each other, honestly.
There's something very interesting with Meshuggah. A good friend of mine that I've known since we were children, he's a big Meshuggah fan, and I never really was into metal
it's
much,
intense.
but it's very intense. But when Frederick Tordendahl, he from Meshuggah, he asked me to create something. I started like listening to the track, and I started really like listening to it, and suddenly I felt all these like, I was like, oh yeah, this is really really good stuff.
That's not easy stuff to really listen to.
No, but it's stuff that you have to, when you listen, you have to listen to it a couple of times, and then it starts to grow in you. It's not like easy listening stuff that like a pop tune that's just good for the first time, and then after that becomes, no, this is like stuff that really, and it does, like even on a non-metal head like me, it really, and I really actually enjoy it.
I can respect it. The time signatures are genius.
Yes, they're
like
absolutely
out of this world. And let me just say that the music video that you made is very inspiring. The way it's all like, I mean, it's metal, dude. Like, some of your other stuff is like real mystical and fantastic, but you nailed that. Good job.
Oh, thank you.
That's so cool.
I mean, that's the cool. That's the cool. Like, you want to try different things, not just in like the venues where you go, or the sort of like whether it's an art gallery or a festival like Burning Man or something. I haven't actually been at Burning Man myself, by the way, but you also want to try like different looks or aesthetics, which is really cool, especially when you approach it like a film. There is one that looks like a science fiction movie, and one could look like a period film or something like that.
Yeah.
Or like for the metal one would be, I don't know, something like a horror goth or something.
You know what? At the Albuquerque Museum of Natural History, there's like this giant fractal show.
I've heard this, yes.
I went to this fractal show like 2 weeks, last week, I think, 2 weeks ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Wolf, the guy's name, I think it's David Wolf, actually. But not Avocado Wolf, a different David Wolf. I'll correct myself later, but
every Friday they have like fractals on the side of the building or something like that, right?
It's in a planetarium.
Oh, it's in a planetarium?
It's in a dome, yeah.
Oh.
So that kind of experience, it was so like, I was sober, wasn't on drugs, but the zooming effect, it was intoxicating. Like just going in and out of these, like just keep like zooming into these fractals, and then like at like high speeds, and then zooming back out. It's like there's something really, really high energy about that, and it's totally translatable to metal, and also like some of the crazy electronic music that's coming out these days. Like who are some electronic music producers that you're listening to right now?
There's like that's a
hard question.
I've always liked, it's not specifically like right now, but I've always been a fan of Spongel and Ott.
Nice.
That's really, but that's not specifically right now. That's been for the last 20 years or so.
Right.
I wouldn't. Like there's not one specific one that I
got an open mind for cool.
Yeah,
cool, man.
It's not even one genre that I listen to. I listen to so many different genres, but it's
genre is kind of like a veil, in my opinion. It just helps people understand what they're about to listen to. See,
that's right. Yeah. Well, people expect you to sort of be like either be a metal or a psytrance or whatever.
So this is funny. So I was showing my aunt the Meshuggah video that you worked with. What's the name of the song again?
Clockworks.
Clockworks. Thank you. Right just before, pardon me, I had a brain lapse, but I was showing her the video, and she was like, wow, that's really pretty. And then I turned the sound on, and she was like, all right, I love you, but that's got to stop.
Yes. Like I said, it has to grow on you. So you should have played it like maybe 5 or 10 times for her. Then she would have appreciated it after the 10th
maybe
time.
First thing in the morning, very loud in the house. Oh, I kid. Okay, so this is good though, because we're talking about like a dichotomy of fractals. One thing I like about a fractal is it's symmetrical, right?
Yeah.
So, there's like this dancey rave culture, and then there's like this headbanging metal culture, and it's pretty much like the balance and the symmetry between the two cultures. They're all linked together through like this one energy in the middle, right? That's like an equation or something.
Right. Yeah.
And it's so crazy, because one thing we were talking about outside was how at a certain point fractals stop being art, and you were saying this earlier, how it's like, you're not how would you say it?
Well, I was saying, like, I don't think that fractals are art. Like, I was making a comparison with paint. Like, the paint of these paintings isn't the art. It's well, I mean, this sounds like a cliche, but it's like what you do with it, right? So, I mean, for me, that's like, fractals are not the ends. They're just a means to. I just use them to create this sort of, or actually, I even should maybe avoid using the word create. I mean, I do think it's an art, and there is the art form, but I often make the comparison not with the painter or the sculptor, who actually really creates their creation, but more with the photographer or cinematographer of.
That's right.
I don't create the mountain like a National Geographic photographer, right? He makes a beautiful photo of a mountain. He doesn't create the mountain, but he does frame it right, waits for the right light. He knows where to sort of, how to make it into. And this is a little bit like what I feel like I do with the fractal. Like, I don't create these fractals. I couldn't take credit for that. Like, it's not even possible for a human to come up with that stuff, right?
That's the mystery of it all.
Absolutely, which is what makes it so fun for me.
And so, is everything a fractal?
I think there's definitely theories out there that you sort of,
No, it's not fair to ask you that. Like you're the fractal guru now, but
you can see fractals in everything, but more important, like what's more cool is that in fractals look like other things, right? So in fractals you can see things that you know from like architecture and living organisms.
Broccoli.
Oh yeah, that's easy.
All the trees grow in a fractal. Even the veins in your body are dispersed in like the golden ratio, and like
that's right.
That kind of connection is it inspires me personally to have it goes into like really heavy meditation practices, man. Because when you sit and meditate, when anybody does, eventually you dissolve away from your identity, as an artist even. And so recently I did this thing called Vipassana. Do you know what Vipassana is?
I've heard the term, yes. I have not done it myself.
So basically, for anybody listening who doesn't know, it's like a 10-day silence retreat where you're meditating for the entire time practically, but like sitting, meditating for 10 hours a day, and no drugs, no phones, no like contact with people. You're not even supposed to look anyone in the eye.
And you don't talk, right?
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
You don't even write stuff down. You're not supposed to do yoga either. So, like, in that space, and there's like over 100 people doing it too. So it's not like you're going to prison or something like that. But in that space, you're kind of looking at yourself as if you're you making one of the fractals. You're seeing life that you've identified with as this fractaled out cause and effect of all the choices we've made as people. And And that quantum could be, in a sense, the algorithm used to create or see the vision of a fractal, right? That's a crazy parallel, but somehow knowing that there's people out there who think in a way that is like practical in terms of creating beauty, creating art from existing systems of beauty, it really gives hope to the fact that it gives hope to the people that would hope to change themselves for the better. And I certainly have felt that in a sense with all art in any sense, but to take it to the form of these what's the technology called?
It's Mandelbulb. Mandelbulb is the
Mandelbulb.
That's the name of the first three-dimensional fractal that was discovered, I believe, somewhere around 2010.
See, that kind of it just puts it into like a real honest perspective for people. And I want to ask you, like, do you ever find yourself in dreamscapes, like while you're asleep, experiencing like proliferating Niagaras of like geometric fractals?
Very rarely. When I'm dreaming now as an adult, I tend to dream more about everyday things, or houses or people. But I remember one of my first, and this is a memory that came back when I was playing around with fractals. One of my first memories of it as a child was some like fever dreams when I was like really sick or something, when I was like 2 years old, 3 years old, or something like that. I remember these dreams were absolutely abstract and weird, and they were sort of orbs of energy that were like weirdly connected, and well, I couldn't really, I could never later thinking back, I would think that was weird, but there's no way to put that in words. And then later I saw these fractals, like that's pretty much. That's pretty much. I wish I would have those dreams again, but I think at some point when you learn stuff like words and object recognition or something, your mind creates objects and words and more concrete stuff from these visions. But when you're a child and you're sort of like pure and haven't been fed that stuff yet, you get these more like the raw, like the construct, the raw code, which apparently it may be fractals. Yes.
This kind of goes into this idea of the sidestepping equations within the fractals, because in the movie The Matrix, there's a really that I can recognize. There's a scene towards the end. Have you seen the movie The Matrix?
Of course I have. Yes.
Yeah. Great. So there's a scene at the end where like he jumps into Smith and he blows him up, and the other agents are looking at Neo, and he like flexes and the walls bend around him, right?
Yes.
That kind of reminds me of sidestepping in a sense, and like there's this concept that's existing today as that sounds like the phrase reality bending, or and it kind of goes into this like magic realm of like sorcery, where like you can exert your will on the environment around you. But do you think that art can be that disruptor?
What do you mean with art can be that, like art can explore these ideas? That's very interesting. But I'm not sure what you mean with be that disruptor.
So I guess if
you're asking if it's really possible to
bend
art,
reality,
to bend reality?
Yeah.
No, it's a legit question, but that's not what you're.
That
right?
is what I mean.
Okay. Wow, I'd have to think about that. I mean, like maybe I wouldn't literally believe. Like sidestepping is the thing that I talked about in my blog post, right? That's what you mean, which is instead of going linear through time, we're sidestepping through time. So we're staying at the same time, but we're looking at slightly different versions of that reality, but only so slightly.
Yeah.
And and that if you would take frames of all these moments and you would make a film of that, you would actually get some sort of fluid motion, which would look really weird because it's not going linear through time, but it's sort of like sidestepping through other timelines and other versions of time. I would love, I would love like that sort of stuff. Really, gets me excited. Like I would really love to explore these things. It's just the only way I know how to is through like computer simulations and that sort of art. I wish I could make it more real than that. But,
for me, seeing that kind of seeing that technologically replicated in front of me, based on the fact that fractals can be seen through all things, I wouldn't be surprised if like somehow our conscious experience is like a smear against an otherwise perfect linear time experience, because there's some times where time does move slower or it does move faster, and this is the theory of relativity, right? That like the faster you go, the slower you experience time. Or wait, that's right. And then like
that's right.
And with that in mind, it feels like consciousness. Well, here, I'll put it this way. There's a way to slow down our thoughts, right? Like you can be thinking really quickly, but then inside your mind you can say, wait, let me have this thought a little slower.
Yeah, when you start like concentrating on the thought itself, you can sort of slow it down,
And so that is the flow state that artists tap into. In a sense, you get more time consciously, and almost, and by the method of creation, we can sidestep the ego or the drama or the heartbreak or the struggles that everybody on the planet goes through just to create, and then it looks like a curve in space in a way, because it's like our identity would have been different if we hadn't have made that art, right? We might have just run right into the obstacle and like splatted all over the wall, but because we had some sort of like creative flow state, we kind of like warped our story into this manifestation of what we wanted. And it's magic in a sense. Like when I look at your art, I have no idea how you're making it. It really transcends my understanding of technology. Maybe that's because I just haven't looked. It's because I'm ignorant. But
well, thank you. It's. I mean, what you say about flow state is absolutely true. That if you are creating and you're in that flow state, that you are completely. You don't know that you're thinking. You don't know the passage of time. You don't know about yourself in space. You're just in that fractal space, and you're not even when you're just navigating through these fractals, but also when you're doing more mundane things like ticking boxes with which lights to put on and off, or waiting for a render, and then you see the render is like one scan line by the time, so you're just like watching pixels grow on the screen, which would look extremely boring to an observer. But when you're in that state, it's every pixel is like an entire universe, and you're really in there, and that's it's the only way that I couldn't, like I'm pretty lazy usually, so I would just not, if I wasn't in the flow state, I couldn't even try, because I'm like, if I have to then render that, I would have to wait and have to do all this stuff. But when you're in that state, all these things don't matter anymore, and you just go in, and it's a wonderful, like if I didn't have that, I would be a really pretty boring and miserable person probably.
Yeah, and honestly, this is an important thing to talk about, because it's like you're in a flow state or you're in an anxiety attack somehow. That's what it feels like sometimes.
Yes.
And those two states of mind have more in common than most people have, or most people feel like they have time to think about, because all the pressures of being a creative person, and somehow you can get pressured into feeling like you're not supposed to feel bad sometimes, or you don't want to be negative or something like that. Like, we forget that the similarities between an anxiety attack and the flow state exist within the adrenaline rush. Like, an anxiety attack, it's just this adrenal response to a fight or flight sensation.
But you get the adrenaline with the flow state as well.
Yeah, and so somehow the work comes from lifting the realization of, like, I'm in an anxiety attack, to the possibility of I could go into flow state at any moment, knowing that it's the next, like, step of evolution for humans or something like that.
Well, the big difference is with an anxiety attack, you are a slave to your thoughts. You have thoughts that keep coming in your head, and you can't stop those thoughts. And like negative thoughts, and whereas with the flow state, there are no thoughts. That is like meditation. Like it's really like the thoughts are not there. You just. I do talk to myself, like I say to just like out loud, like whatever the weird names of the formulas are or something like that. But you don't actually think. You don't. It doesn't feel like thoughts. I think that's a big difference, maybe that.
Yeah, it's like, and if there are thoughts, they're just flowing out. They're like nothing's lingering, right?
Yeah.
And in that sense, it's kind of like. And in that sense, the artistic method is like a dojo for a martial artist, right? Like, you go into this place, which for you is a program. For me, it's Logic too. It's a program, or Logic X, and you're in there for hours. It seems like, and with like very little concern for the amount of time that you've spent in there, or even food sometimes. Or sleep. Definitely not sleep. Forget sleep. And that kind of what's it called? Dedication really pays off over time into this feeling of helpfulness rather than helplessness. And that's one of the big reasons I wanted to create this podcast, was so that all the young artists who feel like they could go do something creative and help in the community, realize that the way to do that is to like burst through the anxiety. I mean, if you don't have anxiety about it, bless you. Bless you if you have all of it laid out in front of you perfectly. But a lot of us have to really you have to pave our own path, right?
Well, the 10,000 hour rule. So I guess in order to, if that's a big. I haven't done 10,000 hours, or maybe I have of Fractals by now. I don't think so, because I think it's like 7 or 8 years but I've done probably 10,000 hours of just like general computer animation stuff. And in order to, so the whole point of these 10,000 hours is that you need a sort of like muscle memory or whatever it is, so that you can completely unconsciously do these tasks. And then only then can you sort of not think anymore about what you do, and then can you sort of get there. So I think, like, I don't know, and there's probably cases of people who can sort of already right out of high school get into like maybe with drawing or something, because you can draw from when you're 4, so you can definitely already at the age of 20 probably but with computer animation that's probably going to be a little bit more daunting, or any digital technique or something, and it doesn't have to be 10,000 hours, but it's something like that when you do have to really master and unconsciously do it, just not because practice makes perfect or anything, but just so you can get to the flow state and you can sort of transcend or free up your mind rather to more creative things, or just another level of creativity instead of just knowing where all the buttons are. Yes,
that is a great way to look at it, because it all, I love this podcast because when it's good, it's all relevant. And this goes right back to saying how, in a sense, you felt more like a channel for the Fractals, right? How, like, it's the source of it all is already there. You're just kind of putting it into frame, right?
Yeah, that's my role. That's definitely, yeah. I cannot claim that the fractals weren't there. They exist in a mathematical space in a way.
And this is what's really weird is because we're talking about tapping in, but in a weird way, it's kind of like tapping out. Because you like get out of the way of the ideas, and then you're just the vessel that's like creating it, and it's impersonal.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Well, at that point, you're just like channeling the source of it all. I mean, I think about artists like Alex Gray, Allison Gray, great examples. They've made like prolific amounts of art that it just seems like it would exhaust anybody, but somehow it's if they identify as some they're not just pushing all of their energy out. It's got to come from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
I understand, and that's the flow state, I think, in this kind of psychedelic experience that's happening all over the world, whether it is through entheogenic substances, hopefully taken in a responsible setting with people that love and trust you, or through, hypnagogic light therapy, or just looking at this wonderful medium of fractal art. It takes you away from the projection of society onto us as like these ego people who just can never have enough. And it's the consumption pattern and habit, or the ego habit, really is like the biggest what's it called, it's an epidemic. How often it's a hard conversation to get into, because ideally you would want a fully integrated, enlightened being to tell you that there's segments of our personalities that, unless we become aware of them, they'll control us. Like in the anxiety attack, we'll have our thoughts just be almost the employer of our sensations. But artistic method breaks us out of it.
Yeah.
That's a great realization to come to, man. Honestly.
Yeah.
You know what, dude? We've got about 5 minutes left in this interview. I'd love to ask you if you're working on anything right now that you'd like to share with the world.
Yeah, I am. I'm working on a new full dome film that I've pretty much finished it, but I'm not really happy with it yet, and I might change some scenes around, and the music is yet to be scored. Will be scored by an Austinite, actually.
Really?
Yeah, David Levy. He lives right here in Round Rock.
Oh, cool.
He did also the music for my Fractal Worlds exhibition in Washington, D.C. At Artec House. It was a 21-minute immersive installation, and he did his music is very cinematic, as film music in a way, but he really understands all these other concepts as well, and he's got this sort of cool Blade Runner style thing going on, and it really works very well with the Artec House exhibition. So I asked him to do my full dome film, and he said yes. So I'm really excited about that. I don't know when it's gonna be out exactly.
Take your time,
but
make it good. Yeah. I'm sure it'll be amazing and beautiful. Oh man. Honestly, you are a wonderful podcast guest. This is really, really good, dude.
I did really enjoy it.
Oh, sweet, man. Honestly, if you're ever in town, or if I'm ever in Amsterdam, let's do it again. Because honestly, good conversations are hard to come by sometimes.
Cool.
And it's good to have friends. Bless you in your work, dude. Thank you so much for sitting down, and I can't wait to see what you make in the future, man.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it, and it's definitely do this again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Peace, man. Well, there you go, people. That was the episode. One thing I really liked that we focused on was how fractals can be seen almost everywhere. So it kind of makes me wonder if consciousness is a fractal. You know, like if our perceiving awareness currently at this moment fractals up and down microscopically and infinite mystically, whatever that means. Thank you so much for listening, and I can't wait to hear about all of the awesome art that y'all see when visiting Julius's website. If you enjoyed this music, it's a music project called Fugue. A lot of the art can be found at Julius's website. And again, it's my honor to bring this podcast to you. Thank you so much for listening. Namaste. Alternative